everybody. Welcome to another episode of 10,000 Roads to Financial Freedom, Financial Independence. And I have myself here, Professor Pete Alexander, who is an expert in stress relief. So I think we're really going to have a treat today because Professor is also going to help me release some stress during our episode. So hopefully it can be useful for our listener and viewer over here. Welcome to our show, Professor.
Elisa, thank you so much for having me on the show, and I really appreciate the listeners' time as well.
That's awesome. So Professor, I'm going to kind of go back because I understand you're an individual who has reached a financial independence, and the stress relief, information that you provide to patients and et cetera, is just kind of a hobby or giving back, a way to kind of give back. So we really like to kind of go back to all the way in the beginning of your childhoods and try to explore on the mindset shifts and pick up the breadcrumbs about what kind of set you up as an individual that you are, which is someone who was entrepreneur mindsets and a way to become successful. So can you take us back all the way to your childhood and then tell us a little bit about either an incident or a person that had a big influence in your life, which you think back now, that kind of made a contribution to your mindsets and et cetera, that helps you to become a successful individual?
Sure. When I look at that, I think about there's been several individuals in my life that have done that. But I would say that I had a couple different teachers that I had that were ones where I looked at and said, I want to be like that particular person. And for me, it was about the way that they approached doing things. So whether or not it was their personality, being a fun personality, helping people, giving back to others, giving their time. And so that was something that I thought, well, you know what, if I am able to give, positive influence to others and give that positive energy out to the universe, what it was amazing is as I continued to try and do that positive energy, I would attract back that positive energy back to me, and it would help me grow. I also noticed that if I was negative, what would I attract? I would attract negative people, negative energy. And so that started me on a journey where I realized, okay, if I actually want to accomplish things, I can't focus on the negative. Because if I focus on the negative, I'm just going to continue that spiral and I'm going to attract more and more of that. And, people say, well, that's kind of like woo-woo and it doesn't make any sense. But it really is, because think about it, Lisa, think about like if you're running late. And let's say you have to get to an appointment and and now you're starting to stress about it. First thing, you can't find your car keys, let's say. And then you finally find your car keys. And then now you're trying to get to that appointment. And guess what? You're going to hit every red light, right? I mean, it's just going to be, it's just, you're attracting. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So, for me, if I have to get to an appointment or something like that, I take a mental note. Just a very simple example in that is, if I get a green light as I'm heading to an appointment, I say, thank you for that green light.
Yeah. Wow.
Because it's a simple thing, because I'm attracting, I want to hit more green lights.
Yeah. And I think we always talk about, gratification, or not gratification, the gratitude towards, writing down your gratitude note on that with our students. I think, this is kind of along that line in terms of identifying things that are positive. So even if you're in a negative mindset, it kind of snaps you out of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I've worked with a lot of people who, we've all had those days where we wake up and it's like, oh, we got another day, right?
Right.
And a simple question to ask yourself is, if you need to snap out of that, is to just say, is there anyone else in the world having it worse than me right now?
Yeah.
And if you truly think about that and answer it honestly, you're
Yeah.
going to snap out of it.
Yeah, it's true. Life could be better. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Wow. So, you being only on the show for like less than 10 minutes, you're already giving us all these different tools to really start your day. There's no excuses not to start your day like really positive,
Right.
in a note. Yeah. That's
Well,
awesome. Yeah.
it is, it's true. And, one of the things that you have to think about from a gratitude standpoint is that statistic or true numbers, there's been in the history of the world, there's been approximately 116 billion people to have ever lived.
Hmm.
And there's roughly 7.5 billion people alive
Hmm.
today.
Yeah.
That means 14 out of 15 people approximately who have ever lived on earth are dead. So the fact that you woke up in the morning means that you've already won the lottery.
Wow.
So think about that. You've got another day to do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm gonna definitely think about that today, and hopefully every day. So great, awesome. So kind of fast forward a little bit because I wanted to kind of get into your story, and then we're really getting to core parts of an interview, which unlike our other interview, I'm going to really horn on like your ability to kind of bring positiveness, the stress relief to your
Mm-hmm.
patients, and hopefully benefit our viewers over here too. So kind of fast forward a little bit. So you had a W-2 job, my
Mm-hmm.
understanding is. So I
Mm-hmm.
guess growing up pretty standard. Is your parents like kind of like, hey, you got to go to college and that's kind of like the only path, or you kind of figured out like, I want to go to college and then get a job? Is that kind of like the thought process?
Well, my parents were both W-2s.
Mm-hmm.
And, the it was interesting because I decided I was when I graduated high school, I was already working a lot of hours. I was working at the former Radio Shack. I was a
Oh,
assistant store manager, and in fact, after my first year in college, I was thinking, well, why don't I just work full time and what do I need to get my degree for? And I'll just work retail. And thank
right.
goodness I had a couple of my friends who said, "Are you crazy? You need
Yeah.
to get your degree because you want to do better,
Hmm.
and learn and explore." And so I had some good friends who talked me out of that. Um, but I followed, after graduating college, I followed the typical, okay, go get the job. And
Hmm.
I was a W-2 for the first 14 years of my career, roughly.
Hmm.
And then I discovered the fun of entrepreneurship,
Hmm.
and went ahead and first had an internet marketing business, and then got talked back into going into corporate for a few years, and actually found that my entrepreneurship really positioned me well for additional W-2 jobs,
Hmm.
because I had an expertise in a particular industry, the medical device industry,
Hmm.
where there weren't very many people like me. And
Hmm.
so I was able to really build a good career from that.
Hmm.
Um, but I also was, getting the entrepreneurial bug back, because one of the things that I've noticed why I'm much better as an entrepreneur versus a W-2 employee
Hmm.
is I don't appreciate micromanagers.
Right.
Though micromanagers and I do not connect. And so for me, I decided, okay, I ended up buying a business
Hmm.
back in 2005, a struggling landscaping business,
Oh.
and basically turned that around, and was able to get it back on the path to growth, and really continued to grow it for several years. And then I brought a business partner in to run the day-to-day stuff,
Hmm.
because I was asked to go back to corporate,
Hmm.
had an offer that I couldn't refuse. And
Hmm.
so I spent another few years in corporate before I had my stress burnout.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I
So
realized there was a
yeah.
reason why.
So what were you doing at so I guess there's so much to unpack over here. So I'm gonna highlight a few things and dig in a little bit deeper. So you talked about having creating a landscape company. Seems
Mhm.
like you're a little all over the map with like the career path over here. But in the landscaping, so when you took it over, it was a business that was not performing. What would you
Mhm.
say attributed to the success of it? Kind of give us like a 5 minutes quick round of that.
Sure, sure. So
Yeah.
basically, there was a couple reasons. So why did I pick that first is probably a
Hmm.
good thing.
Yeah.
So I was looking for a business, and I did not, first of all, I knew I didn't want to be in your typical retail or restaurant business because the hours are intense.
Hmm.
And so I wanted a business that I could have a life balance with.
Hmm.
And so I picked interior landscaping, because that business, for the most part, is 8 to 5, Monday through Friday.
Hmm.
And so it worked well for that. And secondarily, it was a company or a business that I could understand. I could wrap my hands around it. And it was after I bought the business,
Hmm.
it was clear to me that where it was really functioning poorly was in two areas. One was the sales and marketing aspects, and the
Hmm.
other one was the operational side.
Hmm.
And so basically, I focused on those two areas, and it is now, in continuing to implement that, it even with the COVID taking a hit this last year and stuff.
Hmm.
It's, in at the end of 2019, it had grown 10 times
Wow.
since when I first bought it. And, we lost about 10-15% of the business during COVID.
Oh, COVID. Yeah.
But it's rebounding well. And that's
Mm.
because it's basically, it's a matter of putting the operational side in place and continuing to market it effectively.
Mhm.
And then also, bringing on the right people
Mhm.
to support the business and paying them well.
Mhm.
And so, having our employees, basically, gave them bonuses every month for working through COVID and stuff. So it's a big
Mhm.
difference from, you know, companies that are just going to, not take care of their people.
Right.
So, so it was, the right thing to do there. But I'll tell you something, there was a lot of work involved in getting that business turned around. And in
Mhm.
fact, it was in 2008 where I first had my first bout with the drastic side effects of letting yourself get stressed out, because I was
Mhm.
in the process of really building that business up, and
Yeah.
I had some other responsibilities as well, and I got stress-induced diabetes. I was diagnosed with
Wow.
that. And
Wow.
so, so being an entrepreneur doesn't mean you're not going to have the stress. It's
Mhm.
it's how you handle the stress, how you manage the stress, that and that's all. It's all about being aware of it, and having the right mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. So how much hours were you working in the beginning and then kind of leading up your 2008, I wouldn't call it a breakdown, but like potentially getting the diabetes and all that
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the company was open 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, but I was working easily 12 to 14 hours a day. I mean,
Yeah.
because and in addition to that, here's the crazy thing with that is you do those hours. My kids were young at the time, so I
Right.
was having to try and focus on them. I was wrapping up my PhD at the time. It was crazy. So I was
Mhm.
doing a lot of things, but I got, there was so much that company needed to be able to be successful.
Mhm.
And so it was lucky for me that I was able to implement as much as I could um, up through 2008. And then of course we had the recession at that point.
Mhm.
And this is the interesting thing. My company was the only interior landscaping company in the San Francisco Bay Area to continue building itself, growing,
Yeah.
versus every other one, because was losing business left and right.
Right.
And the reason I know that is because we all buy from the same suppliers. And
Gotcha.
so we knew exactly what was going on with our competitors in terms of not knowing exactly, what their revenues and everything like that, but just
Mm,
finding out that they were not, our suppliers were telling us that good thing that we're continuing to buy stuff from them.
right, right. Because then your
So
supplier would be out of business too. Uh,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So, and so it was a lot of hours, but then bringing on a business partner helped a lot. Being able to continue to hire really good people,
Mm,
and letting them shine helped a lot.
hmm.
And that allowed me, once I was able to get key people in place, that allowed me to go ahead and go back to an offer I couldn't refuse back in corporate until
Hmm.
I had my true burnout, because the
Yeah.
diabetes, in 2008, you should have been a wake-up call for me because of all those
Right.
hours I was doing. But instead of, listening to my body about what stress was doing to it,
Yeah.
I continued to burn the candle, but this time, first in the business and then going back to corporate. And so I was doing this full-time job in corporate. I still had a lot of roles to do in the landscaping business. And plus I,
Hmm.
parent and other responsibilities and stuff, until I had a crash and burn in 2018 that
Hmm.
was extremely serious. I got a serious case of diabetic ketoacidosis. And for your listeners who don't know what that is, my body was actually eating itself alive because of my stress.
Wow. Wow.
It was crazy.
That's crazy.
I got admitted to the hospital from the emergency room. I was an hour from being comatose. And then I had a 3-day stay in ICU. I'd never
Wow.
been in ICU before. So
Wow.
it was crazy. And here's the nuts. This is the part that's really crazy. And for all of your listeners, you know, often as entrepreneurs, we are type A, working very hard.
Hmm.
So on my second day in ICU, I mentioned earlier about how I don't do well with micromanagers.
Yeah.
So I had a micromanager in my last W-2 job. And let me tell you, I'm just too old for that. And
Yeah.
so at 6 a.m. on my second day in ICU, I get a text from my boss that says, "You have a webinar you need to run at 8 o'clock. What are you going to do about it?" And first of all, what a surprise. I didn't have my laptop with me in ICU.
Yeah.
And my boss knew that I was in ICU,
Oh
right?
my God.
And so I'm there with my phone doing everything I can to try and reschedule this webinar. And my blood sugars were so high when I first came into the hospital that the medical grade glucometers could not read it. They estimated that I was 8 to 10 times higher than you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Well, on the second day, I finally came down into a little bit more reasonable numbers. And so the nursing staff was checking my blood every half an hour. And so as I'm trying to reschedule this webinar, the nurse comes over, checks my blood, sees that my numbers took a 90-degree angle and went straight back
Wow.
up. And she says to me, just as a matter of fact, she says, "You realize that's what put you in this hospital bed in the first place."
Right.
And that was the epiphany moment where I went thinking, what am I doing to myself? I am trading my career, my health for my career. And
Right.
that is a really bad trade.
Yeah. And then for a webinar, which I feel like your boss could have just took over and said, hey, he
Mhm,
was in the hospital. A simple act
mhm,
like that, just
mhm.
feeling the other person is a human being instead of like a
Exactly.
machine, right? That's ridiculous. So I wanted to kind of go back a little bit to your landscape company again. Sorry, just last question
Sure.
around that. You mentioned you were the only successful business in the Bay Area.
Hmm.
What would you think you did differently? Because we're kind of in the middle of pandemic right here, so
Hmm.
that's why I want to
Hmm.
like kind of highlight on that. It's so important. Some parts is the mindset shift, but some parts is also what are you seeing that the specific opportunity that you saw probably that helped your company versus other company?
Yeah, so it goes back
Mm.
to, we were saying at the a little earlier about the sales and marketing and the operations side.
Mhm.
So for us, why we were successful back during the last recession it was because we focused on a very specific avatar, a customer type, a certain revenue type. And so we honed in and focused on that. Whereas most of our competitors, they just they'll go after everything.
Right.
And so when you go after everything, sure, you got a lot of opportunities, but it also takes your mindset, your sales and marketing effort, and spreads it thin. So we just said, okay, let's focus on a very specific type of company that we want as a client. And from that, we were able to really focus our marketing and sales efforts, and it was an extremely effective strategy, and that's what we continue to do to this day.
Yeah, and how do you identify that's your sector, that's your niche?
So it basically, it's trial and error is how it came about. And it really started back in 2000 and I think it was 2007. So we were in 2007, I was focusing on some bigger accounts, and I was able to capture several of those. And I remember my biggest account at the time was coming up for its renewal. And I had done everything to make sure that this was going to be something where we were going to renew the 3-year contract. And what happened was there's an 800-pound gorilla company in our industry that can basically offer a pricing that's ridiculous. If they want to knock a competitor out on price, they can do it all day long because they just have the resources to do that.
Right.
And sure enough, I got that that was the competitor who came in. And I remember looking at this and thinking, wow, I do not like this. I do not like having to compete strictly on price, because when you compete strictly on price, one thing that I learned as a marketing professional, as well as in reality as a business owner, when you are focused strictly on price, your customers are only going to be loyal to you until somebody offers them a lower price.
Right.
So there's no loyalty there. And so I thought, okay, I want to go after businesses that the price point won't be as so like the 800-pound gorilla won't really pay attention to it, as well as the price point won't be one where if a company is looking at to try and cut back, they won't necessarily pick the landscaping as one of the things that they want to cut, because it's not costing them so much. And when you get to that point where it's at a price point that is not so high that that it stands out on their monthly budget, but if they take out the plants, it creates a real negative loss to the office environment. And then people go, oh, this is really bad, because there's one of the things that interior landscaping does is it helps reduce stress. It helps and clean the air, etc. So when a company pulls the plants out, that is a real sign that the company's in trouble.
Right. Because they have to take care of the workers as well. So everything kind of leads towards your later, undivers stress release. That's awesome. Thank you so much for going back on that and retouch on that. I think that's very important, which is, basically focusing on creating your fan base essentially, and create a customer loyalty and create a niche market just for yourself. I think that type of marketing is a lot more valuable than just kind of blanket cover everyone. That's awesome. So fast forward, you were having the ICU. Did you actually put your phone down at that moment and then just said, screw it, I'm not going to reschedule the webinar? I'm actually very curious about that moment.
Yeah, it's a good question. So yes, I did reschedule it. And then what I did was I spent when I had that epiphany moment. I spent the rest of that day thinking about what I had been doing to myself over the last 10 years, actually going back all the way to my childhood, because I grew up in a very dysfunctional family, so there was a lot of stress as a kid. So you learn to deal with it, and you manifest a lot of this stress. So I kept on thinking to myself, okay, what do I need to do? Because I don't want to, I want to be around to be there for my grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
And if I continue doing what I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to be around much
Right.
longer. So what I did was I decided I looked during that day. I just looked at where I wanted to go. Um, Fortunately, I had most of my financial apps on my phone. I started looking at that
Mm-hmm.
and realizing that, you know what, financially I'm secure at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's now time that I take care of my health.
Mm-hmm.
So the day after I got out of the ICU, and the day after that, I resigned,
Mm-hmm.
and I focused all on trying to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I started doing was applying several different stress relief tools and techniques that I could find, Googling, reading books, etc. And what I found was that by applying these, not only did my, stress start going down, my glucose numbers as a diabetic went down,
Mm-hmm.
my weight went down, and my energy went way, way up. In fact, it was almost as if I had experienced a fountain of youth, because if you look at a picture of me today, and
Mm-hmm.
then you look at a picture of me 13 years ago in 2008,
Yeah.
I look a lot older.
Right. Because you have a
So,
picture of you on your website that was like your older
mm,
self, right?
mm-hmm,
And then I see you here. You look a lot younger, happier.
mm-hmm,
Yeah,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
definitely.
exactly. So it's basically amazing what our body can do to regenerate itself if we can avoid basically the negative stress. Because that's one thing that I hear a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs, say, well, wait a minute, you know, we can't eliminate all the stress. And that's absolutely right. In fact, we need certain stress. We need some good
Mm-hmm.
stress to get things done. And so good stress, it's also called eustress, EUSTRESS.
Mm-hmm.
That is the stress that puts helps us prioritize things. It makes sure that, if we're working in our companies that we love, we're
Mm-hmm.
doing projects that we love, it's what helps us make sure to get the things done on time, on budget, etc. That's perfectly fine. That
Mm-hmm.
kind of stress does not kill us. The stress that we need to avoid falls under two categories.
Mm-hmm.
It's either one where we're looking in the past and we feel guilty, or we have a lot of regret about something in the past. That's called
Mm-hmm.
rumination.
Mm-hmm.
And if we ruminate about something, we can't in the past, first of all, we can't do anything about the past.
Right.
And what happens is that when we keep ourselves in the past, we stay out of the current moment.
Right.
And today is all today, right now, this moment is all we can do. And so it distracts us from getting whatever we want done here. So I always suggest to people, don't get rid of the guilt about the past. If you
Mm-hmm.
need an activity or two, I always help them with that to get rid of that guilt. Don't focus on that. The other negative stress is having anxiety over some future event.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we start worrying about something in the future and we start thinking, oh my God, it's going to be terrible, terrible, terrible. Well, it
Mm-hmm.
goes back to what we were talking about earlier about sending that negative energy out there.
Right.
So if you keep on saying in the future that, oh, it's going to be bad, 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 what do you think is
Yeah.
going to happen?
It's gonna probably go bad.
Exactly, because you're going
Yeah.
to manifest that.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so if you can avoid ruminating in the past or being anxious about the future and focus on the present right now, the stress that you have to get things done, that should be fine. It's not going to
Right.
hurt you.
So,
So,
is there a difference then between, let's say, I procrastinate? I'm a
mm-hmm,
procrastinator.
mm-hmm,
So I'm a chronic procrastinator.
mm-hmm.
Goes back even in my college years. I will probably
Okay.
only study 3 days for my exam. That's it. So, and I think I've heard somewhere that they talked about if you procrastinate to a certain degree, you actually become more creative because you let your idea manifest for a little bit
Mhm.
before you like let it out. So is that a bad stress, as in like caused by procrastination, and you're like, oh, I only got a 1 day to finish this work,
I
or
wouldn't I wouldn't call it a bad stress unless the procrastination, if you
yeah,
start beating yourself up about it.
yeah, I never
Yeah,
do that.
because
So
because think exactly, because
yeah,
think about it, we are all our own worst critics.
yeah,
And so if we put ourselves and say, "Oh, you're a loser because you procrastinated," no.
yeah.
But if you're procrastinating, I know so many people who are pretty close to genius level,
Hmm.
who don't, you could call it procrastination, but as you said, they're thinking about it, but they know exactly how much time they need to get something done, or
Hmm.
to study for an exam or whatever it happens to be.
Hmm.
And so it's about being comfortable with yourself, and as long as you are comfortable with yourself and you're not going to beat yourself up because you procrastinated, let's say if you procrastinated and then you failed on something,
Hmm.
and then you start beating yourself up about that, that is a negative cycle, and there's definitely something that needs to happen
Hmm.
to help. But if you think about it, if you are what I always love to work with procrastinators on
Yeah.
is making sure that they're very clear on their personal values.
Hmm.
And the reason is because if you are very clear on your personal values,
Hmm.
I guarantee that you will not procrastinate on something that is aligned with your personal values.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's critical. But what happens is a lot of times we will procrastinate about something that doesn't align with our personal values
Hmm.
because we don't want to do it. It's not important to us.
Right. Right.
So it's a matter of figuring out what's important. Now, in college, obviously, you know this, I know this, we had to learn a lot of content that
Doesn't matter.
would never, it doesn't matter. It was just like, the administrator said, yeah, you need this, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
and I mean,
Yeah.
and I remember when I was working on my bachelor's degree and having to take classes that I had taken in high school. And it's like,
Right.
what are we doing here? But those you just get them done.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is. But
I wouldn't
but
recommend anyone do it my way, which is study 3 days before the exam and not attending other classes. But yes.
well,
That's
it was so. I'll tell you. I remember, now that you remind me of this. I remember my very first. So my degrees were in marketing,
hmm.
and I remember my very first marketing class, Marketing 101 or whatever it was,
Hmm.
and being in this class. And I remember my friends in college were saying, "Oh, this is going to be a great class, blah, blah, blah." People were taking it. They were enjoying it. It was creative, fun. And
Hmm.
I'm thinking, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. Well, I get the one professor who has all this tenure, and all he does is he sits in front of the class and he reads, I kid you not, you remember in the textbooks how they would bold certain
Yeah.
terms?
Yeah.
So he would flip the page, he would talk about the bolding, he would talk about the examples in the book, nothing. And so I remember sitting here, for the
Yeah.
first up till the first exam.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, well, he just read from the book. I just got to look at the book, right?
Right.
Sure enough, I
Yeah.
got 100% on that exam because all I did was I looked at the book.
Right.
So what did I do for the rest of the course? I looked at the syllabus. I said, okay, I've got 2 more exams. So for that hour, I would go and I'd play racquetball because
Yeah.
I wasn't going to learn anything. And
No.
then
Yeah.
so I showed up only for 2 more times, the 2 exams. And guess what? I got an A in the class. Do you think I learned anything?
No.
No.
Probably not. Yeah.
I'll tell you what I learned.
Yeah.
I learned how not to be a professor. That's
Right.
how I learned
Right.
it. So when I started teaching classes several years later, I engaged the students. So
Yeah.
so that's what I learned from that.
Yeah. It
And I,
must be a
and I got
treat,
it was,
to
and
be
I
in your
got some good.
class.
Well,
Yeah.
it was because what I would do is I wouldn't teach theory. I would teach actual application.
Hmm.
And so we had all these different activities that I would do in class, and it was great because the students loved it. And I was teaching marketing classes, and so most of it was based on competition and stuff, so they loved it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that
Sure.
information. And so that's good. If you're chronic procrastinator like I am, then maybe perhaps it's probably prioritization. So certain things may not be
Yep.
important enough that you don't even have to stress over at all, or
Absolutely. Yeah.
even
No.
do. Yeah,
Right.
even do.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
You just make sure that you're very clear. I have on my website, I have a personal values activity that you can do for your career, for your, any aspect of your life. And as long as you know what your top personal values are,
Hmm.
anytime that you have a question about whether or not prioritization is important or not, compare it to your personal values, and that will give you the right prioritization.
That's awesome. And then we're going to put Professor's Pete's website in our show notes over here as well. So you can kind of click
Great.
it down below
Sure.
here. Awesome. So let's talk about happiness a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more. So I know that a lot of our listeners and students are kind of seeking their way out to financial independence
Mm-hmm.
or mind freedom in a way that they can be rid of their restrictive in some way or the other shapes. Their W-2 jobs are somewhat restrictive,
Mm-hmm.
or they want to have security of their life,
Mm-hmm.
which is why they're interested in seeking financial independence.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes I've met this one guy. He's beyond financial independence, very well off. And then he told me one advice. He said, happiness is a very funny thing because you think it's tied with the financial background to some degrees. But once you reach financial independence, what is financial independence? Because are
Mm-hmm.
you reaching happiness? So that was a very interesting, conversation I had with him. So how would you define kind of happiness for our listener? Because a lot of us are kind of going after financial independence, but once you kind of reach there, you have a moment of lost, of feeling lost. And it usually takes about people 12 months to 2 years to kind of find themselves and what they really want to do, what's their new routines and all the other
Mm-hmm.
things.
Mm-hmm.
So can you kind of give us your take on that?
Yeah, it goes back to that personal values. It
Hmm.
really does. Because if so it's a great example of trying to be financially free. And then, I remember earlier in my career,
Hmm.
it was all about getting the greatest, the better house, the
Hmm.
better car, etc. And the problem with that is when you are striving for material things,
Hmm.
once you get those material things, the happiness that you think that was going to come from that is short lasted,
Hmm.
because then you realize, okay, what else is there? So what I always recommend for people about the happiness is figure out, first of all, what's important to them.
Hmm.
And that, doing that personal values exercise, and it only takes a few minutes,
Hmm.
is incredibly important,
Right.
because when you keep aligned with your personal values work, it's like your North Star.
Hmm.
Because if you deviate off of it and you start doing things that aren't aligned with your personal values,
Hmm.
it causes you stress because you're not aligned. You're not being true to yourself.
Hmm.
So when you do that and you start focusing on that, then it's a matter of deciding, okay, now I want to achieve happiness. What does happiness look like to me? A
Hmm.
great way to do that is to do
Hmm.
a vision board or a vision binder,
Yeah.
because what happens is that then you look at that, you create that, and it is, if it's assuming that it's aligned with your personal values, that is something that is a continuous reminder of what you want to do next. And
Hmm.
it's wonderful for someone who is either looking to achieve financial independence,
Hmm.
or looking for what do they want to do now
Right.
that they've achieved it, because
Right.
it gives them a purpose. What
Yeah.
is it? What is the greater good that you want to do? What is it that you want to do to impact the world? What is it that you want to do just to do with yourself,
Right.
and it's by doing these personal values work and doing the vision board, you're not only tapping into your conscious mind, you're tapping into your unconscious and subconscious to really align yourself with
Mm-hmm.
what is important to you. And so you just focus on that North Star. And the reality is that we're going to have bumps along the way,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, because think about it, as you're trying to get financially secure, or you're already financially secure, and now you want to do something new,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to run into some roadblocks. It's
Right.
inevitable. And as long as you don't say, oh my gosh, it's another failure, it's
Mm-hmm.
not failure.
Right.
You're when you're trying to achieve something that you haven't achieved before,
Mm-hmm.
you're in uncharted waters.
Right.
How do you know what's going to happen? You don't.
Right.
So
Right.
what you do is, instead of thinking that you're failing because you ran into a speed bump or a wall here, all
Right.
that is that's just the universe giving you feedback that you need to do something different.
Right, right. And the experience, right? That's kind of come
Mhm.
with
Exactly.
experience, in property. So in our apartment management, for example,
Hmm.
we have learned so much during this pandemic than all prior years when things are smooth sailing.
Hmm.
Because and then when you look at all these things, it's actually making you a better operator, making you a better landlord, that
Hmm.
kind of provides more for your tenants and
Hmm.
and for your investor as well. So I think I definitely agree that the failure is what kind of makes you stronger. It's a building step to that.
It's all
um
it's it's all about learning. It
yeah,
really is. It's
yeah.
teaching you. It's teaching, and I'll tell you, I have learned far more from my failures than my successes.
Hmm.
I
Yes.
really have.
Yeah, yes. Most happy people I meet, they're kind of they're on that same train.
Yep.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And we do have all these informations for our students over here too. That's usually what we do. I love like kind of hearing you talking about the vision board, talk about what you write down as your dream, because I think that's the step number one for someone who is thinking about focusing on working on their financial independence.
Hmm.
So, Professor, you have reached a financial independence yourself as well.
Correct.
Can you share some of your secrets on how do you turn these W-2 or active jobs into somewhat of a passive income? Like you shared before, for example, envision your business as something that someone else is going to help you run versus
Hmm.
you're running yourself, and in a way
Hmm.
to use people's resources, time really, to kind of help you making that income more passive.
Hmm.
And by no means that's probably still an active income for you, but probably as passive as it could be. Uh, and so other avenues would you recommend our listener to kind of explore into so that you're making all that high income, high paying job incomes, but then you're kind of somewhat, I'm guessing, converting into something that's more automatic, some
Hmm.
passive
Hmm.
incomes. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So first of all, if for whichever listeners are still on their W-2s,
Mhm.
um, the thing that I'm always amazed about is not taking advantage of maxing out your 401k,
Mhm.
because that's what I did. And
Mhm.
and I, it's when you max that out, what's great about it is that it goes out of your paycheck before you see it, and then all of a sudden, boom, as long as you've got it set up properly for investing, it's going to grow rapidly. So that's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. Then the other thing that you have to look at is, if you have some income or you have savings that you can apply to something that can create that passive income. The next one that I would highly recommend, you were talking about apartment buildings, et cetera.
Mhm.
Absolutely, real estate,
Mhm.
and to decide what it is that you want to get out of that real estate, because usually, if you're investing in single family homes, and you're trying to get the good cash flow out of it, yeah, you can potentially, but it's gonna, you have to have the right locations, of course.
Right.
So you have to decide whether or not you're buying into real estate for the investment over time to grow,
Mm-hmm.
or is it cash flow? And
Mm-hmm.
apartment buildings are great for cash flow if you can keep them, fully rented or close to fully rented.
Yeah.
So, and you don't have to necessarily think about it by going, okay, I can't afford to buy an apartment building. Well, go in with investors. I
Mm-hmm.
have several people that I know that went into it, in a contract,
Mm-hmm.
obviously where they all are part owners in the the apartment building, and they all share in the income from that. They also share in the expenses, of
Mm-hmm.
course.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all about setting up some sort of passive income like that. If you invest correctly in, I'm not a stock market expert, so
Yeah.
I don't,
Me
I
either.
basically, I use a financial planner for that.
Yeah.
And so I think that if you get to a point where you've had enough income where you can afford to work with somebody
Mm-hmm.
who can help guide you in what the right scenarios are, especially like, I was working very closely with my financial person, from the pandemic, and what makes the most sense.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I had a lot of my uh, stock investments in international
Mm-hmm.
prior to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And the what I did was I changed that around some, because depending on the country of
Mm-hmm.
how they're going to respond to it, are they going to be able to be able to recover faster, et cetera, and what were they doing, to be able to get the economy going. And the U.S. is still doing a lot of that, so I moved a lot of mine back into the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's a matter of not just setting and forgetting your investments, but make sure you check on them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and make sure that, before it's too late. Now, there's no solution. It's just being mindful of that. But so I found, though, that it really is important not to have all your eggs in one basket. So, I'm pretty much, in terms of my entire portfolio,
Mm-hmm.
it's, the business is a portion of that. My stock is a portion of that. My cash is a portion of that. So it's having a good blend of all of
Mm-hmm.
that, and not just focusing on that. And I've got real estate as well.
Yeah.
So it's making sure that you have a good blend, so that if something takes a big hit,
Right.
you have other areas that can help
Balance.
buffer that. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
that's the worst mistake I can see people making, is having everything in one area, and then all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden that area crashes, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like, what are you going to do?
I'm the latter. I'm actually in all eggs is in one basket, but the only thing I do is the index fund that's different.
Mm,
But with apartments, there's many different ways to diversify. So different markets, different
mhm,
operators, different
mhm.
type of classes of assets and etc. And then we're doing Airbnb as well on top of it.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So just different ways, but still diversification in some ways. If you know what you're doing, you still want to diversify within the areas where versus
Hmm.
buying one single apartment with all your savings in there will be a little risky.
Oh,
For sure.
absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
I remember when I started investing in real estate, I actually bought 5 properties all at once on an auction, and
Mhm.
then learned a lot of hard lessons
Oh
from
yeah, yeah,
that.
oh yeah, yeah. That's 5 active projects all at once. No wonder your
Oh,
stress level was high,
oh
probably.
my gosh, it was so bad. And there, and I had one property who I owned that thing for, oh God, was it longer than I want to admit, 5 years, I think. And I
Uh-huh.
literally, it was It was empty more about 3 of those 5 years. It
Wow.
was
Wow.
killer. And I was paying a mortgage on it. So
Yeah.
it was a complete, complete anchor. It was terrible.
Wow. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Awesome. So, Professor, you shared with me before we started interview about stress release. I like
Mhm.
to kind of ask you the question about what do you do every day, kind of anchors you or gives you a really good start of the day. You kind of shared some of that before, but do
Mhm.
you have a morning routine that or a certain quick tricks to kind of get yourself also de-stressed in a way?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in meditation.
Mhm.
So I start that in the morning. I also do an evening meditation as well.
Mhm.
And I do my evening one with my wife. The morning one I do by myself
Mhm.
because I get up earlier than she does. So I do that.
Mhm.
I do also I do 10 minutes of reading,
Mhm.
just as part of my morning routine. I do an exercise regimen
Mhm.
to get myself going. I also love to take a walk outside at some part in the day. I always look at my calendar and say, okay, where can I put that in? And I actually use my calendar to block that time in my calendar
Mhm.
so that so that I make sure that that is a priority, because
Right.
that's one of the things that if you go by a calendar and you find that something important to you is not happening during the day, you
Right.
need to block it off in your calendar and treat it like an appointment.
Right.
So I do the walk there, and then I also like to journal.
Mhm.
So I do 10 minutes of journaling, basically, what basically talking mostly about my gratitude. What
Mhm.
am I grateful for? And the gratefulness is not about big things.
Mhm.
It's about a lot of small things,
Right.
because we find that, if we're only grateful for the big things, but we're not grateful for the things we take for granted,
Mhm.
then you lose sight of those things.
Right.
So,
Right.
so I do that as well. And usually through my meditation, I incorporate. I don't even have to incorporate it; it just happens. Some deep breathing as I'm
Mhm.
doing the meditation. And for your listeners who say, "Oh, you know what? I can't do meditation because my mind wanders." I had the same opinion until I learned that just because your mind wanders during your
Mhm.
meditation does not mean that you're not meditating correctly.
Mhm.
What happens is that if you are meditating and your mind wanders, it's because your mind is trying to get rid of some stress that it's got,
Mhm.
and it's helping process whatever it is. And so if you realize that your mind is wandering, you just bring yourself back into
Mhm.
the meditation space. Don't beat yourself up and say, "Oh my God, I can't meditate
Right.
because I was thinking about this." It's like, so what?
Yeah.
Don't worry. The meditation is supposed to be calming.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then I also like to do a visualization exercise, especially if it's a particularly stressful situation, like if let's say I'm on a Zoom call and it's getting heated or something like that,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
maybe I have to have a difficult conversation with somebody.
Mhm.
Visualization works wonders for not only helping you calm yourself, but also helping you get yourself grounded and ready for something. So,
Mhm.
like, for example, if you want, I can walk you through this.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Definitely.
takes one
Yeah.
minute. So,
Yeah.
okay. So, what I'd like you to do, close your eyes
Mm.
and take a deep breath. And I want you to go in your mind to a place you like to relax. Maybe it's the beach, maybe it's a park, maybe it's a lake, maybe it's your backyard, maybe it's a spa. Wherever it is, go there in your mind and take in all of your senses. And what do you feel? Do you feel the sun on your face? Do you
Mhm.
feel the grass or the sand under your feet? And what do you smell? Do you smell the fresh air?
Mhm.
maybe the lotion from the spa. What do you hear? Do you hear the wind blowing through the trees? Maybe the water splashing on the shore?
Mm-hmm.
And what do you see? Do you see the blue sky? Maybe the green of the trees or the grass? Whatever it is, take it all in and then take another deep breath. And open your eyes.
Wow, that was good.
Wasn't it? And you can
Yes.
do that anywhere. You can do
Yeah.
that anywhere. It's just go to your, we were talking about happiness earlier.
Yes.
Go to your happy place.
Right. Happy
And
place and happy routines.
and
Yeah.
happy routines. And the important thing is to imagine your senses, because
Right.
if you just go to your happy place and you don't think about what you see, what you feel, what you hear, what you smell, it won't necessarily be real for you, and your body is trying to ground. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how you help yourself ground.
Gotcha.
And
Gotcha.
it takes
That's
1
awesome.
minute. 1
That's
minute.
awesome. Hopefully, our viewers or listener is doing the same exercise with us as well, and then using this trick to kind of snap themselves out of whatever situation or stress. So, would you recommend doing this as an exercise when you feel like stress is coming, or you're
Mm-hmm.
kind of anxious at the current moment? Try to think about all the stuff I got to do in the day. Just kind of take a minute for yourself. Yeah.
Exactly. And the key thing is that when you if you have an activity, and that's why my blog has all these, there's
Mhm.
hundreds of over 100 different activities, most of which take a minute or two.
Yeah.
It's all about finding something that works for you.
Right.
And if you can find even one thing that you can use on a daily basis,
Yeah.
that 1 minute or 2 minutes a day will have enormous benefit over time. It's just
Yeah.
that you got to start doing it.
Right. And then sticking with it as
Mm-hmm.
well. Kind of having a
Exactly.
trigger. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Professor P. Alexander, is very nice to have you over here. Before you go, I got a one last question for you. So you
Sure.
have children. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned a lot of stress in our life, started from early conflicts, children has to subject to sometimes.
Yep.
What would you recommend for parents like us that has young children, to bring up their kids to be creative, foster their entrepreneur mindsets
Mm-hmm.
or whatever
Mm-hmm.
they want to be, to give them the positive support?
Yeah, that's a really good one. From a parenting standpoint, what I would strongly recommend is remember that, to don't try and control the uncontrollable.
Hmm.
So, especially with small kids do all these things. And if you're trying to micromanage them, it's going to just create stress. So what happens is that when we're faced with a stressful situation in parenting, we get them all the time, right?
Right.
We tend to stress about all aspects of it.
Yeah.
And if we do that, there's only maybe in our mind share, it's about half of our mind share is focused on what we can't control and what we can control.
Hmm.
If we can say, okay, what parts of this can I control, and focus as much attention on that,
Hmm.
then you can affect change. But
Hmm.
when you focus on stuff you can't control and
Right.
you beat yourself up about that,
Right.
you're just going to waste so much energy. I'll give you a perfect example.
Yeah.
When I think about this, my daughter was probably 1 year old,
Yeah.
and we were waiting to get into a restaurant to eat, and literally turned around for, I don't know, 10 seconds,
Yeah.
15 seconds. I turned back around, and my daughter, 1 year old, is going like this. Like this. And I'm thinking, what is in your mouth? And I go over to her and I get it out of her mouth. And you know what it was?
Yeah.
It was a flattened cigarette butt with
Oh.
lipstick on it. And I'm
Uh.
thinking, oh my gosh. And I started thinking, how bad of a parent was I? I was allowing this to happen and stuff. Could I control that? I couldn't
No.
control that, but I was able to rectify by getting it out of her mouth.
Right. Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
just, the kids are going to be kids.
Yeah.
And you know, especially when you're stuck at home with them now and they're not going to school and everything like that. It is what it is.
Right.
Don't try and control the uncontrollable. You
Yeah.
don't have control over the fact that your school isn't, they can't go to school. You can't control the government response to COVID, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Don't waste your time and energy on that. Focus
Right.
on what matters. And
Yeah.
then, and if it goes back to your priorities and your personal values, because as a parent, family's obviously going to be a big aspect of it, but make sure you know what is important to you about your family
Hmm.
and always go back to that. It will
Yeah.
help you immensely.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. Go advice. And we have so many blogs on Professor Pete Alexander's website, which we're gonna put it down below, and that's www.petealexander.com. And basically, he has all these blogs that helps you to kind of de-stress yourself, help you talking about parenting techniques during the COVID. And I've read some of these, which is amazing. So we're going to put all the links down below. Thank you so much, Professor, today for your time and the exercise that we did. I already feel like a lot more relief.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Lisa. Thanks again for having me on the show, and thank your listeners for their time.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right. Bye. See you next time.
All right. Bye-bye.